So, Dragons of Tarkir or Dragonstorm stories and everything are out already, and I have not read any of them because I am
Ooh.
still processing the past stories, and I've gotten myself really worked up about Winter and how I really feel they left so much untapped potential. He just didn't live up to what
Yeah,
he should have been.
the ultimate
Because you
sad
look
boy.
at Yeah, I mean, look at the art from his cards, both the commander and the course, the main set one
Yeah,
in Duskmourn, and he looks like he should be the front man for Sisters of Mercy or something like that. He looks cool,
yeah,
and just considering the large, really zoomed out arc of his character, which is teenager gets abducted or lost in a hell dimension and then manages to survive for 10 years, then makes a deal with the devil to go home, but fails and gets another chance and fails again. That that sounds like it could be really compelling.
yeah,
And and what I want from that is a story where I see this person making these horrible decisions, but I'm asking myself, I wouldn't do that, right? Would I do that? Could I resist like being able to finally get freedom at what cost? Um, Alternatively, you could really lean into just making him a villain, making him a really, really evil person who has the opportunity to do better and just chooses not to. But what it seems like we got, my feeling when I see his end is like, yeah, that tracks.
yeah. I think it's really interesting. They have the potential to go a similar route that they did with Liliana, right? Liliana famously also could have just straight up been a villain, but instead was acting with the good guys just to
Mm-hmm.
kind of get her own, get her freedom on her own terms and stuff like that. I could see a case being made for like Winter doing that in the future. Winter, helping out the good guys, but really it's just to kind of work towards freeing himself from Valgaboth.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that too, but it feels like his arc is just done. It feels like they
Oh,
had this opportunity
yeah.
and we just didn't. I mean,
No,
my lesser complaint is we never saw him being a badass, really.
yeah.
We saw him say, here's a lighter. And we saw him be cowed by the Wanderer in the first story. And
Yeah, really
God,
most of the favors that were paid towards Winter, especially in Ether Drift, was specifically in the art
yeah,
rendering of him. All of his car looked badass. His all of his his dynamic poses and his all of that stuff screamed, "I'm really cool. Look at me."
yeah,
But just don't read about me.
right. And he seemed to have this. I expect him to have attitude. Like, I don't know. I'm not a writer. I can't write that way. But what we got was just someone like a believable survivor
Yeah,
character in Dustmore, and someone living there, but didn't match up with that art. And I don't want to lay this at the feet of Shannon Maguire and K. Arsenault Rivera because they're both really good authors that we see
yeah,
do incredible work elsewhere. Like my favorite story, maybe since the first era of the game, post Urza, is Keep Them Alive
yeah,
from Dustmore. Like
yeah.
I read it in a doctor's office lobby and I was sitting there weeping and I imagined the people around me thought, wow, they are here to get a exam for some kind of terminal disease
I have
because
I
I
have
was so distraught.
I have goosebumps currently just thinking about the story. No,
It's
it was
so good.
beautifully written. I completely I stand with you on that one. Um, but yeah, I also get what you mean. I think maybe, I had a chance in Magicon to talk to some of the editors for WotC, and so I know that like a lot of stuff really just boils down to the word count that they're given.
That's what I
They
was
can
afraid of.
they can only fit so much detail on so many different characters. Within each of their allotted, pieces. So
Mhm.
I wonder if maybe that's kind of why he took a back seat. But it is a bummer because you're right. He is everything about him screams main character. Everything
Yeah.
about him screams this could be a beautiful, story beat, and yet we're given almost nothing.
Yeah. So I feel like as a reader, as an audience member, I feel highly competent in saying whether this worked for me or not, and it didn't. When
Yep.
it gets to the why, I feel a lot more like I'm armchair quarterbacking because I just don't know. There may be things like overlook, but my inclination is that yeah, if we had some scenes of him waking up in a cold sweat of a dream where he heard his mom calling him to him, and he just hasn't really, been able to work past getting trapped in Duskmorn,
Yeah.
or just, a memory with a puppy or something, and he's like, it's been long enough. Maybe I can see this dog before I die if I get back soon.
Yeah.
There are all these ways that he could have been humanized that would be really, compelling and make this a really moving, tragic arc where in the end people just yeah, he's a traitor, so I get why they don't befriend him, they don't take pity on him, but we should like feel kind of sad about that and be
Yeah.
saying for whom the bell tolls.
I agree with you, and I think that when you had brought up me coming on and discussing Winter with you, I kind of
Yeah.
reflected a little bit on his story and him as a character. And I will say that while I enjoyed Ether Drift quite a bit, and I did enjoy the story, and I think that on some level that's mostly just because my team won, and I have to feel proud about that. Go Amonkhet.
Yeah.
Um, but I will say that you know, as cool as Chandra is, as cool as Nissa is, we've had so many stories about them. We've had so
Mhm.
many stories about the core planeswalkers, the Oathwatch members. And while it's cool that they're there, and it's cool to see Chandra, grappling with, her past with Abishkar and stuff,
Mhm.
I do think that the space Chandra took up in that story would have only been better for us, the audience, if that was actually inhabited by Winter. Mostly because it's a new character. It's one that has so much depth already. And ultimately, if you were going to and this is no offense to the writers or the story or anything like that, but if you are going to put so much time and attention and care into describing the race through the eyes of Chandra, that the pain of trying to get this for Nissa, and then
Mhm.
ultimately knowing that that's not going to come to fruition anyway, then why not spend that story time in a more rewarding way for us, the audience, by introducing us further to a new character that you're going to push really hard. You're putting
Yeah.
him on the covers of packs, on the covers of the booster boxes. He's, he's very much so outwardly marketed as the main character of the set. Um, and yet we're not treated to that. And I do think that was a
Yeah.
bummer for me.
Yeah. Which thread to pick up on? Let me pick up on the thread that I had planned about talking about anyway,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
is
yeah, yeah.
okay. I've already made my case for I think he should have been a sympathetic character, but if not, he should have been a real villain. And so I reread this every story part with him in it in anticipation of talking with you about it, and I did find some story beats that I just didn't remember before, and they just were kind of soft. It's like he kind of does the kick the dog thing to make him a real villain with Lute. He's like strapping him onto the car and he makes a whimpering sound, but it was so like that author, K. Arsenault Rivera. I just reread her side story from New Capenna
Hmm.
about Angelo the painter,
Yes.
and he's just killing people. Maybe not left and right, but like people die. There's real violence here.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Magic
yeah.
generally is not
Rough.
afraid of real violence. So if you want to show us that Winter is not just someone who bad things have happened to, he's really evil, then have him hurt Lute on purpose there. I mean, half the audience wants that to happen anyway, which I find kind of disturbing. But like, take the opportunity to show him actually being that person because
Yeah,
everything we see, it seems pretty justifiable as a trauma response. I mean, he's been,
I
I don't
agree.
know, I don't know what's happened to him between Duskmorn when he got sucked up into the ceiling by
Yeah.
Valgavoth and showing up with like blue fire magic. And I'm really bothered that the two articles, the Planeswalker's Guide versus the Legends of, kind of paint different pictures, because one
Yeah,
frames him as
they don't
alive.
fully address it. Yeah.
Yeah, what is his character? Like, he's not a spirit or anything, right? All right, Winter Cursed Rider is a human warlock, which is
Yep.
his same type
Yeah,
in
which
all
makes
his cards.
sense. Yeah, Valgavoth
But
is his patron.
right, and one of the articles calls him a revenant.
Hmm.
And I even double checked myself, because I was like, that means like an undead thing, right? That is an undead being, and I looked up the definition, and generally that's what it's interpreted as. So is he already eternally damned, basically, by Valgavoth?
Yeah, or maybe they're using Revenant as kind of a placeholder for like a relic of the past. He's a survivor.
Yeah.
Um, I think a strong case could be made for either, and I think given the story points that we've seen so far, the already eternally damned by Valgavoth seems like the most likely.
Yeah.
Seems like the most likely use of that word.
The two different things that I really just disliked about the way the story ends is this scene near the end. Obviously, spoilers. We've had lots of spoilers already, but right near the end, we see he's about to win the race, and then Amonkhet zooms past him and everything.
Yeah.
And that segment was beautifully written for someone who deserves to be forgotten. We,
Yes.
as the audience, can feel like, yeah, he deserves that. But again, I'd rather him be sympathetic, some kind of an anti-hero. But even if he's not going to be, he doesn't deserve to be forgotten. They haven't elevated him to that kind of evil.
Yeah. It feels much. It feels like that specific plot point, that moment, would have hit a lot harder if we, the audience, had been given more to latch onto, whether it's
Yeah.
towards the sympathetic, victim anti-hero-esque character or the full-on villain. We needed something more to latch onto for that moment to really hit. I do. I mean, obviously, I'm biased. I'm excited that Amonkhet won, but I do think that it's interesting that they put a lot of work into this character, and the artists clearly put their whole, you know, their whole repertoire into making him look incredibly badass in every piece that
Yeah.
he's portrayed in. Um, but we're just outside of that, he's kind of just treated like a punching bag for the story,
Right.
for no real reason.
Yeah, it feels like he's a stand-in getting his just desserts, and it also happens that way kind of at the end of the Duskmourn story, where he trips and
Yeah.
falls when he's just trying to
Yep.
get out the door, and that feels like a moment engineered for us, the audience, to say, yeah, he gets what he deserves. But who's actually engineering all the bad stuff? It's
Yeah.
Valgavoth and the Speed Demon in this case. Like, that's the actual bad guy who deserves to suffer,
Yeah.
but he's just kind of caught between them, and that's like, I'm having to find the sympathy in it myself, but it's
No,
just not
it's
presented
rough.
to me.
Yeah, it's rough because we're expected to root, to root positively in that moment. We're expected to cheer that, Winter lost, but everything we've been given paints him as a sympathetic character, so we don't want to root for the fact that he's lost. But a
Yeah.
lot of the ways that he is portrayed really, it's like we're not going to give you anything to make him an actual villain, but the way we're going to describe the things that happens to him is going to make you wish he was a villain. Because
Yeah.
nobody non-villainous deserves to have that much sand kicked in their face that
Right.
often.
And it kind of, I mean, the end result is kind of a nihilist story,
Yeah.
but you have to like have this conversation to arrive at that conclusion.
Yeah,
If that
for real.
doesn't feel right, that should be in the text.
Yeah.
But then also, just in the Legends of Aetherdrift article, it describes him as cursed to race forever as a revenant, bound to a life of never-ending road rage. It's just such a punchline. Like,
It
that's
is.
the last thing that's written. Like, it's a joke. It's a throwaway joke.
It is, and also what? So now he goes
Yeah,
back to Duskmorn, but he's still racing.
right. It's such a weird thing to say.
Like there was no racing in Duskmorn. It's not like we
Not till
saw
now.
the giant racetrack in the house.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah. But I think that Well, not that. I'm kind of circling back to what you said earlier. The pattern I notice is that the stories I really love tend to be the side stories. They tend to be not the ones where it seems like the author is given a list of 45 plot points that they have to get through in a certain
Yeah.
number of words. And I particularly remember that for some reason it stuck out to me in the Dominaria United story a few years ago, that it was just like plot point, and it just felt like
Yeah.
nothing had time to breathe. But to a degree, most of the stories felt like that.
Well, you think about the fact that, you know, a decade ago, all of these stories would have been told over the course of 2 to 3 sets, right? We would have had,
Yeah.
we would have what would have been the original Tarkir lineup, um, Khan's Fate Reforged, and then Dragons, all
Hmm.
of that today would just be one Tarkir set, and we would get basically that whole story over the course of, 3 to 4 weeks leading up to the set. And now they have to tell just as much story realistically, but they have to fit it all, in that shorter time span. So I'm sure that, they're quite a bit cramped on, how much they can fit in each story and still make it cohesive and
Yeah.
understandable. But to your point, I will say that I also really like these side stories, especially, jumping forward to the Tarkir side stories just because they're the most recent in my mind.
Yeah.
The side stories have oftentimes been my favorite because, like you said, the mainline stories we get, you know, heavily inundated with just character names and, brief descriptions of what
Yeah.
they're doing in the moment. But these side stories, we really get slice of life, views, top down views of like what is actually happening on this plane that doesn't involve these, like, 4 people that we already know really well, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, um, w it really makes these worlds feel more lived in,
Hmm.
and I think that that's, like, that's crucial to keeping us as the, like, I guess, more Vorthos inclined audience
Hmm.
engaged with the plane and the story itself. We need that kind of lived in experience to kind of latch onto.
Yeah. There's an irony to that too, because Mark Rosewater, he writes so many articles, just so many
Mhm.
podcasts, and we have a lot of insights into his mind. And so he's talked about, I think, it being kind of a turning point, original Innistrad, where they're like, we're not going to just make the like art and story a theme. We're going to make the mechanics part of the theme too. So you should
Yeah.
feel dread in this set. And the side stories of Brothers War, to me, were a real high point. I
Oh,
don't
yeah.
remember exactly how they broke down, but it seems like generally they were good side stories, and the main story was kind of forgettable to me. And they were kind of evoking a theme beyond in that same grander sense. These are stories about war and the horrors of war. It's
Yeah.
like this is not even a genre. This is a whole thesis or an idea, a philosophy that we're going to present and explore.
Yeah.
And they weren't beholden generally to existing character names. Sometimes they would, at least not characters who are well defined. We
Yeah.
didn't know their story. So you give a good author a chance to tell a story, and they will tell you a good story.
Exactly, and I think that Brothers War is a shining example of exactly what I was talking about as well. The
Yeah.
concept that the main stories for Brothers War, each one was, devoted to how is Urza doing right now? How is Mishra doing right now? Like, are they currently fighting? Are they just angry at each other? What's going to happen this week? Kind of a vibe. Whereas all of the side stories were like, yeah, Urza and Mishra are fighting, but this is what that looks like to the rest of Dominaria.
Yeah.
This is how that is impacting everyone else around them, and that to me will always be so much more interesting. Uh, Urza especially is just one of those characters that has had so much written on him, has
Mhm.
had so many sets devoted to him. He's been the main character, the face of the game so often that to read a story about him now, it's difficult to not feel like you're just hearing things you've already heard before. And as a writer, it would be incredibly difficult to look at that 30-year history of all
Right.
of the writing that's been done on Urza and still come up with something new that still that doesn't like errata something that came before it.
Yeah.
But the side stories, like you said, are an incredible tool to explore those past events without rehashing stuff like that and keeping us engaged and feeling like it's new and exciting to be a part of that.
Yeah. So I feel like maybe Magic story would be treated better if they treated it like an anthology series rather than like a serialized main cast kind of thing. I
Yeah.
mean, they're not taking advice from me, but that's kind of de facto the parts that I like. The part where we
Well,
do treat it as an anthology series is just
so we can look. I was just having a conversation about this on Lady Danger's book club Discord,
yeah.
um, and we were talking about Warhammer novels, and they are a shining example of that. Warhammer novels are incredibly well written. They're
Mhm.
beautiful. They're highly rated. And most of them are anthology series. They are about a random cast of, soldiers who are just going through like grueling events. They're not they most of them, with a few key exceptions, are not about like your big names. They are about, this band of orcs that got left on this planet. How are they going to survive? And what does that look like in this universe, this multiverse of, chaos and order and life and death and stuff. So Wizards could totally I would love to see Wizards move towards an anthology style of
Yeah.
novelization to their product. I understand that War of the Spark really kind of killed any chance of us getting, you know, a good amount of future Magic the Gathering novels. Um,
I was out of the game right then, so but I've heard that mentioned. But what happened then?
it was just honestly, it was so poorly written. It read like a fan fiction, and at one
Uh-huh.
point in time, the author made like a specific point to have Chandra like definitively state that they are straight and not, homosexual at all,
Hmm.
and it didn't fit the story. It was genuinely just like an author didn't like something that was being hinted at by other authors and wanted to make something canon for themselves.
Hmm.
And it read like a poorly written fan fiction, and it was the last novel. It was the last
Yeah.
novel that we've gotten. No surprising uh,
Yeah.
anyone, but yeah, that was rough. But if we move towards an anthology style of storytelling of world building, God, yeah, I would just, I it, it would
Yeah.
just be glorious. I would love that.
I recently reread the Innistrad stories, the fiction that came out
Yeah.
there. Unless I've missed something, I think they had not were not necessarily doing a novel per set at a time. They had recently stopped consistently doing those.
Yeah.
And so what we got were just like article synopses of what the main characters were doing. There was never a full, you know, telling a detailed story of Liliana and the Hell Vault and everything. We just got a summary of it. But what we got instead was this awesome Dracula homage. Because anyone who hasn't read the original Navi Dracula, the original novel Dracula, it's was it epistolary? It's all like news clippings and
Yeah.
letters and all these things you read after the fact. And they did that. And so we learn about Innistrad for the first time by reading these letters between Cathars and family members,
Hmm.
and we see these cult plots being exposed, and someone who's created like a sanctuary through werewolves so that their friends who are werewolves don't get murdered. But it's all be these stories, and so there's such a creative way to do this, and none of the main characters from Magic appear there. We
Yeah.
meet Giza Geralf that way, and a number of other characters who become famous.
Yeah.
But
And
yeah,
that's a shining example of how gripping a lived-in world can feel to us, right? If
yeah,
we can connect with these characters from their point of view, we can connect to this plane's citizens from their point of view and see how they are living. Um, we'll always feel more connected to that story. And uh I think that was one of my main issues with, the telling of Winter was just that it
yeah,
felt it felt so much like there were key moments in Duskborn where it felt like Winter's character could go one way, and then for no reason at all, they were just like, "Ha, ha, 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 let's trip him," you know? Like
And also, here's Kaito,
yeah,
and
like
here's
someone just had like a magnifying glass, and Winter is just this ant crawling around the story, and they're
Mhm.
just trying to like zap him anytime they can.
Yeah,
Um, and it pulls you out. It that sense of you don't get a sense of gratification when you're reading about Winter in a way that you totally could if they like if they wanted to, if they wanted to put any sort of effort into defining him as a character. I think that he could be really great.
yeah,
And I think that because of the ancillary because of the what's the word I was going to use, because of all of the side stories and the side characters that we get to see in Duskmorn and in Ether Drift, we know that they have the capacity to tell these like beautiful stories about these characters. We know that they have the capacity to draw us in and feel emotionally connected to people. Um, and that's almost what makes it feel like it's more targeted towards Winter, that we didn't get that.
yeah, yeah. Oh, good. I'm glad I'm not the only one to pick up on any of
No, you're
this.
not. You are.
I mean,
You're
I'm the ultimate target audience for Winter. I was super into The Cure and Depeche Mode in high school, though I was like kind of behind the times. And I
yeah.
was like in an industrial band in college, and I hung out at golf clubs instead of any other kind of clubs. Like, this was my guy.
Yeah.
And look what they've done to my
You're
boy.
just listening to Bauhaus every time you're reading the stories, and
Yeah.
you're just
I
so
know.
disappointed.
All right. Well, thanks for letting me purge those feelings. Now I feel like I have the capacity to move on and start enjoying Tarkir and see what's
I
going on there.
I look forward to having discussions with you about Tarkir. When you start reading the stories, let me know, because I
Yeah.
have lots of emotions and lots of thoughts. Um, Similar to what we've been discussing, I think that you'll find the side stories to be uh so beautiful, so well written, and a lot of the imagery is really nice. So.
Oh, that's good. That's I'm
No,
optimistic then.
it's been getting wide praise across the Reddit sphere and on Blue Sky and stuff. So I'm excited to see what your thoughts are.
Great. Okay. Well, maybe we can do this again after all the Tarkir stories have dropped and we've had a few days to digest them.
I'd love that.
Okay. Well, thanks. I'll talk to you later.
Thank you for having me.